The verse that we have seems to say that the Anatolē is a high priest. In fact, a high priest named Joshua, aka Jesus, is the same word. We have decided that Jesus exists.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to MythVision. Dr. Carrier, we're going to talk about the Logos, the angelic archangel of Philo of Alexandria. We'll need some background knowledge, but listen, fair warning, and we mean this. There is a problem we have, and that we all struggle at some point in some way in life, okay, whatever the topic is, on knowing how to see, politics. Your enemy can be right about something. You don't have to make everything they do wrong.
Right.
You know what I mean? I guess I'm trying to use this as like a psychological tool.
True, yeah.
Richard Carrier may like piss people off with your mythicist stuff, but for this video, he is a historicist, okay? We know how to do that. For this video, we're gonna work with a historicist model just so people can like stop trying to just go, I can't hear him. I can't listen. He thinks there might not have been in Jesus. No. You're a liar. You're a liar. You just heard him say it. Clip it. Share it all over the internet. He's a historicist for this video. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, Dr. Carrier, there is an interesting debate that happened, and I honestly never really dug deep, didn't get my claws into it. I know there's been some spat.
Well, until you read the new book, right? So
I read the new book. I heard there were some arguments made by Hansen and Galata and others that are coming at you, and they're trying to kind of debunk, but they're not really debunking you.
That's right, yeah.
What really gets me is that Philo of Alexandria, here's this historian, philosopher, who is in Alexandria, Egypt, in the 40s. He writes about
possibly 20s. We have to remember that 40s is the last, we know he was active in the 40s because he did an embassy.
Okay.
But his career extends at least from the 20s, right? So a lot, we can't really precisely date his works, every one of them, etc.
Terminus antiquum, terminus antiquum.
Right, yeah. Some of them, like when he mentions a historical event, we can place, but other than that. So we know he's writing it. So some of his stuff is being written before Christianity, and some of it is written after.
Done it.
That's important to know. And we don't know which is which, but
yeah, okay. So we got Philo of Alexandria talking about a divine God, which in your definition,
yeah, we wouldn't say God, of course.
You know what I mean? An archangel, a divine being.
It's important, like monolatry, the worship of one God, allows the honorific God to be applied to only one entity. And that's just a ritual rule. So you're not allowed to call other gods gods, even though from the definition that would be used in the popular culture of the time, they are gods, and you would admit they exist.
Okay.
And, right. So the idea that all the pagan gods are these demons, well, that's just another kind of god. In fact, the word demon, daimonia, is actually just divinity. It's just another word for God, right? So calling demons is really calling them gods.
It's a language game.
Yeah, and they have the same powers, the same immortality, like they're just gods, right? Like,
okay.
So, but within the context of a devout Jewish author or something, you're not allowed, like it would be offensive to use the word God because that's an honorific. You would only use it for the correct one. Now, Paul actually breaks this rule. He talks about Satan being the god of this world, but he's doing it in a mocking way, right? Like he's a god of this world in the sort of technical, popular sense, but he's not the true God, right?
Of course.
So it's important to note that Philo wouldn't use the language of gods. He's talking about angels. But like any pagan listening into this is that you just mean gods, right? Like this,
Angelos,
right? Yeah. This is another messengers. You just mean gods that were created by another god.
Yeah.
Like the supreme god created the lower gods to do things for him, and some of those lower gods rebelled, and you call them demons for some reason. And it's like this whole, like pagans are like, oh, okay, I get it. You really mean gods. You just don't want to say it. Yeah, that kind of thing.
So okay, you there's a history of scholarship behind this that have identified Philo's archangel logos. Can you tell us what, we don't even want to talk about Jesus yet. We want to talk about just what is a logos and what is this archangel and what is he doing with this Zechariah passage?
Okay, yeah, that's a lot of stuff.
But maybe we just focus on him before we get to Jesus.
Yeah. So I wonder if it's easier to do it the other way around, but no, let's just do it that way for a moment. So Philo repeatedly across many of his books, like a ton of them, and I cite them all on Obsolete Paradigm of Historical Jesus, my new book. This is coming out, and so he often refers to this what he calls the Archangel of many names. Right? He never tells us any of the names of this archangel, except one. He says Anatolē. We'll get to that. Anatolē means east or rising. The rising one can mean a lot of different things.
Right.
But so he that's the only name of this angel he gives. He says it has many names. He didn't say which ones are the other names. But throughout his books, he talks about all the attributes. He talks about this angel a lot and drops this stuff as if it's just known, right? He doesn't like argue for it or anything like that. He just drops it like it's just known, like quantity knowledge of the like background knowledge that any Jew would have at the time.
Right.
So it suggests that he's feeding off of some existing Jewish angelology that has already done this, that's already like created and mapped up this angel. And there's actually a ton of like ancillary literature of this period and shortly after that points to this too, right? That there was an understanding, and even like the Dead Sea Scrolls is like you triangulate. There was an understanding that this angel existed within their lore. And Philo just talks about this particular angel a lot. And when he's talking about a lot, occasionally he drops information about it. Oh, this angel has this attribute or this attribute. Some he throws several attributes and so on. And you could accumulate, you list all the things. It's like 10 things, basically, that some he says multiple times, some only one time, and so on. So you can construct the profile of this angel, right? It's like you're like listening into like Al-Qaeda communications, and each phone call gives you a piece of information about this mysterious guy or whatever, and then you can triangulate all that information and say about that one guy. Here's all the things we know, 10 things about this guy now because we can triangulate from all the phone calls we listened into. It's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so like he does this so we can build a character profile for this, what he thinks is this angel. And
is this this is like the proto Metatron, so to speak, eventual?
No, that's a valid way to put it. He never uses the word Metatron.
Of course.
And I'm not sure if he ever says angel of the present specifically, or identifies this angel as, for example, there was a common belief we know probably at this time as well, that the burning bush was the Metatron. When Metatron's more of a title than a name.
Of course.
So Metatron means that God assigns an angel to be his voice. So like the angel shows up and God like uses him like a puppet and speaks through him. And that's the Metatron. And traditionally the Metatron is either Michael or Gabriel. There's a reason for this. And there's a lot of literature on this. Hannah's book on Jesus as Michael is a great resource. It's full of data on this. And so the whole idea that it's either Michael or Gabriel or the Metatron, possibly both, depending on God's choice or whatever. But the Metatron is the one who speaks for God. And if any, like the wrestling, when Jacob wrestles with God, well, that's the Metatron. He's wrestling with the angel standing in for God, right? So anyway, this is the lore at the time. And so, when you're saying the Metatron, when you look at all the clues and all the other things, they do identify the Metatron with all the same attributes. So it looks like they're talking about the same angel, right?
You're pulling together a profile.
Yeah, actually Hannah did, but others have done as well. That this is actually unusual. I said there's been a lot of work on the angelology behind Jesus, and in Obsolete Paradigm, I cite all of this new scholarship. There's tons and tons of books that are promoting early high Christology, and they go into all the angelology, including the Logos and the Metatron and all that stuff. So there's a lot of really great literature that's been published since my original study in 2014. I talk about it in the new book. Anyway, so that's the case. And so good point in saying Metatron, even though that's not in Philo. So let's talk about what is in Philo, actually.
Got it.
So Philo specifically identifies, these are in some cases direct quotes. Some are not. So I'm just going to go through the list. This is in the book, and all the resources are cited in there as well.
Get the book, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
It's on pre-order right now.
Okay, 10 attributes. It's a little more than 10 depending on how you count. But anyway, he's the firstborn son of God. Now that's interesting. He's God's agent of creation, meaning that he's the person that God assigned the task of doing creation. So kind of think like demiurge, except positive. It's not a evil demiurge. It's like a demiurge.
He's a creator,
literally doing God's work for him. And Paul talks about this as like the same concept. But anyway, so we've got firstborn son of God, God's agent of creation. He's the high priest of God's celestial temple. So there's a temple in heaven that the earthly temple is a copy of, and the perfect true temple is the one in heaven. So it needs a high priest, and it's this angel. So the high priest of the ultimate temple in the sky is this same person. So firstborn son of God, God's agent of creation, high priest of God's celestial temple. He's also described literally as the image of God. Okay, Christian, your Christian and ex-Christian viewers are already like ears are perking up.
Yeah.
God's chosen cosmic overlord, literally called Lord, Kyrios, right? So he's the Lord. This angel is the Lord, right? And, God is above the Lord is just the agent of God. And then he's a spiritual counterpart to Adam. So in some sense, he's the second or first Adam. So there's a relationship with Adam. He's the prime intermediary between God and men. So like the principal top angel that mediates in terms of communication and sending messages and stuff and help and whatever between God and men is this angel. This angel is the supreme intermediary. He's the celestial agent of atonement. So this agent does the atonement rituals in the celestial temple. So he's also atoning for the sins of men below. And he's the standard that mortals ought to imitate. So he's like the perfect man, like the symbol of like, this is the perfect, you should be everything that this angel is, right? And they share the appellations Logos, we'll get to that, and Paraclete. So the really hardcore Bible ex-Christians in your audience are like, it's called the Paraclete. Yes, he's called the Paraclete. And so which is really 11 items. I put Logos and Paraclete as one thing. But anyway, those are the other things. There's a 12th item, and we'll get to later. But anyway, let's talk about the Logos, right? So the Logos, if you read the literature, the scholarships, tons of good scholarship on this, and I cite all of it. So the Logos is actually a concept that pervades Jewish and pagan theology. You and I, we did another clip about ancient pagan theology. Where did we come into this? This kind of seems to originate possibly from Stoic thought. Logos is a word in Greek that means word, reason, thought, rationality. Like it has this sort of like broad set of meanings. And the Logos is like all theologies appear to have one. So that it's some sort of like there's a supreme God in all the henotheistic systems, or there's a supreme God and a bunch of subordinate gods. In all those systems, there's an appointed sub-god who is the Logos, who represents the reasoning and the sort of like action agent of
like
the supreme God.
mentions Hermes as the Logos.
Like yes, yeah,
yeah.
Well, Osiris is also specifically identified as the Logos to the higher sort of nebulous God that he serves. So yeah, and then the Jews have the same model that the Logos was then appointed to be this same angel we're talking about is the Logos, who is the sort of the reason, the word. And there's even like interesting intimation that when God spoke the first word in creation in Genesis, that word is the Logos angel, is because it's said in the New Testament, this is the first angel created, right? The first thing that was created was this, and there's other sources saying that the Logos is the first created angel. And so the word comes out of God's, spiritual mouth or whatever, and literally takes form as an angel, and that's the angel that affects creation. It completes the rest of the creation in Genesis, right? So this is the Logos concept. It's widespread and fundamental in Judaism already before Christianity. It was it was widespread in paganism already. It probably went from paganism to Judaism and then to Christianity, right? That's the possible arrangement of events. Anyway, so that's the Logos. And this angel, this Logos, has all those other attributes, right? There's the Paraclete. He's the firstborn son of God. He's the atoner for all sins, and like all of this stuff. High priest of the celestial temple. Like all of this stuff. And we get that from Philo. And that's undisputable. This is like, Philo's very clear. Exact words, archangel of many names. He says all of these attributes, assigns them to this angel. So that's an undisputable fact, right? So the kicker is, and I show this on page 103 of Obsolete Paradigm, is that this is Jesus we're talking about, right? Like all of these attributes, set aside the name Jesus, put that aside as a separate thing. All of these attributes were assigned to Jesus, like literally all of them. And in fact, they're the same sets. So Philo describes roughly 10 things about this angel. All of them get ported onto Jesus. And all of them, except 2, are already in Paul. So they're already like early Christianity, beginning of Christianity. They're already thinking that Jesus was the incarnation of this angel. He pre-existed. He was the first created thing. He's the counterpart to Adam. He's the firstborn son of God. He's all this high priest. He's all of this stuff. You see all of this in Paul. Well, the high priest thing comes in Hebrews, but Hebrews is also an early text, I think. So anyway, so yeah, you could find all this in Paul. The specific words, logos and paraclete, only show up in the Gospel of John. But there's no way Paul thought that Jesus was all these other attributes. He's the same angel that has all these attributes and didn't know that that was the logos.
Is it safe to say that pseudo-Paul letters, though, do imply that? And John, I just interviewed...
Well, the word logos isn't there, or paraclete.
Yeah.
Those only show up in John. However...
He is a demiurge, though.
Yes, he is the creator in
Right.
Paul. Yeah.
Right.
No, Paul explicitly says that Jesus was the agent of creation. He's the one who
I
created.
don't know how you'd be that and not have...
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. No, there's too many things, right? The coincidence is impossible, right? So it's clear that Paul, and that means not just Paul, but all that, like probably Peter and all the original apostles think, for whatever reason, they thought their man Jesus was the incarnation of this guy. And that's totally plausible. Like if you think like they're hanging out with this charismatic man that they really believe in and like he's amazing and they like, you know, excite themselves into thinking he's got to be above, like he's got to be superior to man. He's got to be some sort of godly thing. And what they would say is like, oh, but he's the reincarnation or the incarnation of this angel. And the idea of incarnated angels visiting men was already Jewish at the time. There's nothing weird about it. Bart Ehrman does a really good job of this in how Jesus became God. He goes into the whole backstory of how the incarnated logos is not un-Jewish at all. It's like it totally fits within the Jewish context. So yeah, they could have, maybe during Jesus's life they thought this. Maybe Jesus was a wackadoo and claimed this of himself.
I'm thinking of Pythagoras in a way.
Yeah, right. There's all kinds of things. You think Heaven's Gate or like all the, what's the other one? Koresh, right? You have like that. So you have these particular people that hype themselves up into thinking that there's some sort of like ultimate wonderful thing or whatever.
Right.
So it's possible Jesus taught this. It's possible he didn't teach this, but that when he died, the belief formed that, you know what? I'll bet he was the logos and all. We're going to form our religion around this belief, right? So it's possible the belief arose immediately after his death. It's possible it was whispers among his followers. It's possible he was preaching it. We don't know the exact sequence of events. All we know is that by the time they're preaching the gospel, which is right after his death, right, they're selling it as he was the incarnation of this angel, right? Came to us, died for our sins, and because he's the firstborn son of God, like which is the literally firstborn, like first created being, so he's literally the firstborn son of God, that his death has more mojo. Right. It has more. So like you can kill like animals, but the magic only lasts a year, so you have to do it over and over again every year.
Right.
Whereas Jesus, like he's the super God guy, so if he dies, like his blood is like super magic and like lasts forever. Right. Yeah. So that's explicitly Hebrews 9 what I'm describing. It says exactly what I'm talking about there. So anyway, that's the idea of this, right? And so it seems very clear. Like this is not even disputable. You can't argue this. Clearly, the beginning Christians, thought that Jesus was this archangel that Philo was talking about. Right. So that's the uncontroversial part. And then we can get to the controversial.
Let's move into Mr. Historicist. Yeah. Let's get into the concept. I want to highlight one of the most controversial I heard is the claim others will say, oh, you just say that Philo said that this name is Jesus, and therefore you had a pre-existent Jesus prior to this. You could see the slippery slope on why they forgot about this.
A little convoluted, but yeah.
When I read your book, and I went through this chapter, and I never really read this argument. I know you mentioned this in On the Historicity, but I never really, once I saw...
I have to say, I took for granted that people would think this was obvious On the Historicity of Jesus, so I'm very brief and circuitous. So I realized people are not understanding what it said. So in the new book, I'm much more clear.
You made a very clear case on what's going on by rebutting non-rebuttals. And I was sitting there going, okay, because I know that Neil from Gnostic Informant has been like, hold on, the name is not Jesus, Joshua, right?
Yeah.
And so Philo, correct me, jump in. Philo is working off scripture. This guy knows how to allegorize the hell out of a text.
Yeah.
He
literally wrote books called Allegorizing the Text of the Bible, right?
It's like, dude, he is finding meaning and connecting dots where it's like, the text is not...
That's literally his whole thing is allegorizing the Bible, yeah.
So he's looking back. He finds a Zechariah passage where you have a king, a human king named Jesus, and then you have a priest whose name is East or something to this effect.
Yeah.
Help me understand the characters in the
All right,
original
yeah.
and then why that would make sense.
Oh man, there's a lot of complicated stuff going on there. So I'll start with the core of the argument and then build out from there. So what happens is in Zechariah 6, 6:10, I think, is there's someone supposedly there is being called the Anatolē, which means east or rising one or whatever. And Philo references this and says, you know what? I think that Anatolē is, he doesn't say think, he's much more forceful. He says is, but obviously he's describing his belief about the text. I'm saying that this Anatolē is this logos, right?
Pause real quick. We got to walk with our friends here.
Yeah.
How often do Christians look to Old Testament scriptures and say the angel of the Lord there is Jesus?
That's right. Yeah.
So that keep that
routine,
right?
Yeah.
Keep the logic of Christian in your mind while you're thinking about.
Yeah. For people interested in that, I have an article on my blog, which is I can't remember the title of it, but it's Christians. Like how the concept of Jesus as Lord in the Bible, if you look for those words, you'll find the thing where I talk about how Christians really did think that when some speech in the Old Testament is credited to quote unquote the Lord, they take that to mean Jesus, not Yahweh, right? It's like not the Father, but the Son.
That's analogous to your point.
Yeah, and they think that counts just as much as the living voice of Jesus, right? It's literally like that's Jesus said that. They would literally say Jesus said this.
Exactly.
We have this in 1 Clement. He says Jesus said this. They're just quoting the Old Testament. Like how what do you mean Jesus said that? Like they believe that Jesus said that those are the words of Jesus. So anyway, but notice this is the Lord, that's one of the 10 attributes that Philo attaches to this angel, right? This angel is known as the Lord. So that's one of the 10, right? So anyway, this all ties in. So yeah, in this passage, Philo says the Anatolē is this angel that we just talked about that has all these attributes: the logos, Paraclete, atoner, for sins, the firstborn son of God, etc.
Just so I understand, in the Zechariah passage.
Yeah. Well, that's the disputed part. Okay, yeah. So let's get to that. But when Philo says this, I think he mentions 2 of the attributes of it. He says the archangel is the archangel of many names. I can't remember exact ones. I think he says he's the creator. He definitely mentions that he's the creator, being the one assigned creation. And I can't remember what else he says. He identifies some, he puts some, not all the list. He doesn't give the whole list there, but we can build the list from all the other listening in on telephone conversations, Philo, right? And one of the things that's not explicitly there, but we know that Philo loves and talks about a lot, is that it's the high priest. This angel, the logos, is the high priest of God's celestial temple. That's important here. And it gets important because the verse that we have seems to say that the Anatolē is a high priest. In fact, a high priest named Joshua, aka Jesus, is the same word, same name. And so that would mean that Philo thought that this Jesus was the angel. So that would be in a 12th attribute, right? If you take logos and Paraclete as 2, add the name Jesus. So that means that this angel already had the name Jesus assigned to it. And so our Jesus is being called the same angel. Like, well, so what's the relationship here, right? So there's different ways you can explain that. I'll get into like the nuances of the text in a moment, but you could say that Jesus was more easily claimed to be this angel because he shared the same name, because it's a common Jewish name. It could be, and by the way, it means Yahweh's savior, and Philo also says it's the supremest name, the best name anything could have, right? And so it could be that Jesus renamed himself Jesus so that he could claim that he was this archangel. It could be that Jesus had a completely different name in life, and then in death, his followers, when they decided to decide that he was the incarnation of this angel, they adopted that name and started calling him Jesus as basically an honorific to say, yeah, he's this angel. So there's a number of possible ways that this could happen, that you'd have the conjunction of the name, right? It doesn't rule out historicity at all. Historicity is compatible with like at least three different ways
right
the name could come in. And you have like the sort of clue that you could be interpreted in different ways in Philippians 2, where it says that after his resurrection, he was given the name above all names. And what is the name above all names according to Philo? So, yeah, right. So like, is that evidence? Unfortunately it's unclear what name they mean in that passage. But does that mean, is that evidence of this? Was his name assigned later? And I point this out in the original chapter 2 or chapter 3 of On the Historicity of Jesus. I say it doesn't matter whether he was named Jesus when he was alive. he would still historically exist. Like, let's say he was Manaheim, and then he got renamed Jesus, and that became the honorific after his death, and so on. He still historically existed, right? The name got assigned later doesn't affect historicity, and so that's part of the model that I talked about in there. So anyway, this all makes sense, and like, you know, is like a wow, this is interesting. Like the angel has the name Jesus already, and so the pushback on this is to say, oh, no, that verse, you know, Zechariah 6:10, like that verse is, or 10 or 12, I can't remember where it is. But anyway, that verse is, the Anatolē is not meant to be the high priest. It's meant to be this other figure. And there's a variety of different theories as to what other figure it is and so on. The most popular one, but not the only one, is that it's Zerubbabel, the king, and the king and the priest were supposed to come together, yada, yada. Now, there's another more problems with this, is that the verse has been tampered with, so we don't have the original version of it. We have different versions of it in different translations, like the Septuagint disagrees with the Hebrew, etc. And so that's part of the problem of it. But the thing is that the current version we have is basically grammatically saying that it's the priest, Joshua. Even if a previous version of the verse meant it was Zerubbabel, it was changed. And this is, I cite all the scholarship on this. Basically, all experts on first century interpretation of this verse, all of them agree it means Joshua. Anatolē is being assigned Joshua. And they all point out that it's possible that an earlier version of this verse meant Zerubbabel and Joshua, and it was talking about Zerubbabel. But because Zerubbabel turned out to be a failure, he got scrubbed from the scripture, and so it left in place Joshua being the guy, right? Anyway, so there's a lot of different ways to interpret this and stuff, but it's pretty clear that all scholars agree that when Philo was reading the text, Philo would have understood it as talking about Joshua. There's no other people there. There's no one else it could refer to. So that's how we can infer, like in terms of evidence, that that's what Philo is saying, that the Anatolē is Jesus. That means the firstborn son of God. The Logos, the Archangel, all of this stuff is it also had the name Jesus. He understood it to be the case. And so that's the evidence. Now, there's a number of other features here that reinforce this conclusion. One is that Philo says that it's fitting that Anatolē should be this guy's name, because he's the firstborn son of God, etc., and the creator being and stuff. But we also know that he's a high priest, right? So also I should point out that it's not just Joshua and Zechariah. It's Joshua ben Jehozadak, which is Jesus, the son of God, the righteous. So there's a person in this verse. There's only one named person in this verse who is the son of God. You know, so it's the name, Joshua, the son of the God, the righteous, right? So the name is in there. There's only one who's the son of God and who's a high priest, and we know Philo understands this. Angel is a high priest, right? So why would he think Anatolē is referring to Jesus as a celestial being and not the historical high priest that Zechariah was originally talking about, right? The only way would be like he's seeing a passage that's about a high priest who's the son of God. And so he's reinterpreting the verse to mean this celestial being, not the historical person.
And he's reading the names to mean something.
That's right. Yeah,
exactly. He's kind of decoding stuff. And
yeah, he's finding secret hidden messages in the text. Yeah.
Okay, and I can see all the building blocks. That's what persuaded me when I was reading the book, of like, something's going on here. And even if one goes, but sorry, Zechariah is not saying that in Zechariah. That's the point.
Yeah.
Read Paul.
Yeah.
Go read Paul's quotes, and you're never going to walk away and go, well, the Old Testament meant what Paul said.
Yeah, it's worth pointing out that Zechariah, when he wrote, was absolutely in no way talking about an angel.
Of course. Of course.
Like, he was talking about the first high priest of the Second Temple, who was named Jesus. We know this guy's a historical figure, maybe legendary, but possibly historical. And so he's talking about this ordinary man. But Philo clearly is not reading this verse in the way Zechariah meant it. He's not reading it as the first high priest of the Second Temple. He's reading it as this sort of weird space being, right? So clearly already Philo is just off book on interpreting this verse. So the question is, like, who does he think the Anatolē is in this verse, given his weirdo interpretation of it?
Yeah.
And it's interesting to point out that we can't tell whether this is something Philo himself claims to have discovered, because he doesn't really argue for it in a sense. He's saying, it makes sense because of these reasons, but it seems like he's describing an existing belief. Like, it's, apparently like there's some sort of commentators before him said the Anatolē is Jesus and therefore the Logos. And he's saying, yeah, they're right. It makes total sense because, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it doesn't sound like he's inventing this. It sounds like he's describing an existing belief about this angel, that it is this character in Zechariah 6.
Gotcha.
And it gets especially interesting when you go to Zechariah 3, where the same figure shows up. And there's a lot of interesting stuff where he's in heaven arguing with the devil and God. Right. So like there's a lot of weird, interesting stuff going on here that where you can easily, once you start thinking that this is an angel and not, the original Jesus guy who ran the temple, that you could extract a ton of things out of this then that are so spot on for Christianity, right? Like you can see like if Christians read whatever commentator that Philo is relying on to do this, they read that and go, that's brilliant. And then, a lot of Christian concepts flow out of this interpretation that they can use out of this.
Well, I was going to ask you, is Jesus the door?
Is Jesus the door?
Yeah. Yes. Is he the vine? Yes. Is he the rock? Yes. But then when you get to, I'm just making.
Yeah, I get here. No, I totally get you. Yeah.
Because when you get to Paul in 1 Corinthians 10, and he talks about our ancestors traveled through the wilderness and passed the sea together, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, oh, he's just meaning the literal Exodus. By the way, read the commentaries. There's so many mixed reviews about this. I'm like, what the hell is he talking about?
Right, yeah.
When it says that in our ancestors in the wilderness, when Moses struck the rock, that rock in the wilderness was Christ.
Yeah.
Go read, screw the New Testament. Go read the Old Testament. Tell me where you see Jesus in the rock. Notice the magical kind of interpretation Paul has about the rock.
And notice that once you've assumed this, once you've gone to this weird place about, the rock is Jesus, well, that unlocks a whole bunch of reinterpretations of the Old Testament, right? That weren't there originally. That's why it's important to realize that we're not talking about what Zechariah meant.
What about the lifting up in the wilderness? Like
become irrelevant,
the serpent stuff, like, hold on, Jesus is the bronze serpent that was lifted high in the wilderness? Like, you see what I'm saying? They're finding everything back here. Sorry to interrupt, but like...
No, yeah, but that's basically it, right? And so you have these impossible coincidences, you have all the data triangulates to this conclusion, and that's why I point that out. I don't think it should be controversial. I think the arguments are pretty clear-cut. That this angel, that clearly was, that Christians believe Jesus was, already had the name Jesus. That's not a threat to the historical Jesus, right? Like you can totally fit that to the historical Jesus in lots of ways.
Yeah.
It's not evidence against the historicity of Jesus. It just gives you a piece of what's going on in the origins of Christianity. And it's one of those things, like if you're so hostile, like you cannot even countenance that this could be true, that you're preventing yourself from discovering something important about early Christianity, like in the origins and development of Christianity. Like it was fundamental to their creed and their whole movement that they thought he was this angel, right? So even if you're a historicist, you need to get on board with that, because you will not understand why they're talking about Jesus the way they are, why they believe in Jesus the way they do, like all the things they're claiming about Jesus. All of that stuff you're not going to understand properly if you reject this idea that, in fact, the reason all of this is coming from is they think it's this angel, and there's all this that allows them to unlock all kinds of scriptures, all kinds of interpretations to really ground and build out their whole worldview, right? So like understanding early Christianity is fundamentally requires accepting this, realizing and go, oh, okay, this is important. If we want to understand them, we've got to understand this.
Gotcha.
And so that's why I think this is important and shouldn't just be hand waved away because you're scared of the consequences of it.
Well, your arguments made me, because I know how weird some of the interpretations of scripture is from Christian. It made a lot of sense that here's Philo doing something like that. So let me ask you this, as far as using some scholarly backing here, are there academics who go as far as you do in the sense that they also think the angel may be named Jesus? And are there academics, let's put the name aside, if there are, cool, if there aren't, doesn't matter. Are there academics who clearly agree with you that these other listed features are elements that are no doubt there, and that this is something that was mapped onto Jesus clearly?
Yeah, I think, well, certainly all the 10 attributes, that's mainstream, right? Like, so also all the high Christology scholarship in the last 10 years is all on board with this. Yeah, we all agree. Even Larry Hurtado, who you got in a huff about it, the only problem he had is that he had like an honorific concept, where it's like, no, he wasn't an angel, he was some other thing.
Yeah.
Right? But he agrees with everything else, right? Like whether he's called an angel. Now, Philo fucking literally calls him an angel multiple times. So like Hurtado is just off book on this, right? There's no, it doesn't make any sense why he got in a huff over the name, like the appellation angel. But otherwise, he agrees, like all these attributes. Yes, that was absolutely like the case, and Jesus was, truly he was assigned this.
So the beef
Now,
Jesus.
Yeah. So the extra step though of noticing that Philo says this, and that this entails that the name Jesus also tied. As far as I can tell, I'm the only one to explicitly say that. Now, whether there are other scholars, like there are other scholars who I think maybe believe this, but they don't explicitly go there. So I don't know if I might be the first one to really dispel this out. Like if you look at this, you look at the evidence, you got to really come to this conclusion.
Yeah.
I might be the first one to do that. I might not be. I'm not sure.
Well, if they already see the 10, just to use one example,
yeah,
and he's the heavenly high priest, and they go back and they see that this Joshua, the son of Abimelech or whatever, is the high priest of that temple, it kind of almost makes sense why one could assume. Now, you're dying on the hill, but you think it's
I think, and also it's important to point out that there's different scholars here. So like there's a whole, they're not talking about the same thing. So like you have all these scholars talking about the high Christology, right? So they've nailed all the angel stuff, right? So they're on board with me on the angel stuff, and I'm now mainstream on that. But then you have a whole separate body of scholars. They're not talking to each other. They're not studying the same things, who are talking about Zechariah and what they call the tradition history of Zechariah 6. So you have all these scholars, like commentators on Zechariah and stuff. All of them agree that the Anatolē is Jesus, right? So but
and it's like the east or the branch,
right? But these two groups of scholars aren't talking to each other about, oh, by the way, Philo says that guy is this archangel, and they go, oh, that would mean the name is Jesus. Like you don't see them coming together to put the pieces together, but all like my two premises are established mainstream. So like that Philo means Jesus that's mainstream. Everybody agrees who's a specialist in Zechariah. And that the angel was assigned to Jesus was thought to be the same angel Philo is talking about. All the high Christology experts agree with me. So like the thing is, you got these two separate groups of scholars that agree with both premises. All you got to do is put the two premises together to get the conclusion, right? And I might be the first one to have thought of that. I'm not sure. I can't say for sure, but I certainly am the first one to articulate an elaborate argument for it. And I have to say, like I did, and I have been trying to shop this around, and I've had scholars tell me that it's obvious, and they're like, you can't publish that. It's too obvious. It would just be redundant. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure no one else has published this, so I don't know why you think it's redundant. But the fact that they think that I'm just so obviously correct that it's no point in publishing it, and I can't name names because these were in confidence. That was weird to me. So like, I think like and I think those scholars aren't aware of the consequences of admitting that, right? So the scholars who were talking to me don't know that this has anything to do with the historicity of Jesus. So I think like, I feel like it's as soon as you put it next to, like these bottles are next to each other, and we've got the Philo thing, and then we've got the historicity of Jesus, and then there's panic. It's like a nuclear,
that's why
it's like, it's 3 Mile Island. You put them too close together and you fucking have meltdown, right? You can't have that. And I think that's the pushback is based on the fear of what this might mean.
That's why I started this episode, to psychologically tame everyone to seeing, hey, no threats. We're talking to a historicist right now. But if you don't mind, I'd like to do a little magic here. All right, I just decoded your historicity.
Yeah.
So now the final question is, you're no longer a historicist here. We've just deconverted you from historicism. And now how does this plug into the calculator of, don't do math on this, but
I get
plug into the calculator of how this makes sense to your mythicism.
So like one of the arguments for historicity is, well, why would he be named Jesus? Like that's common Jewish name. Like why would you give this pre-existent being, this angel who dies in outer space or whatever, why would he be called Jesus? Now there's already obvious answers for that. Well, Jesus is, Philo says, the highest of all names. Well, obviously it's the highest of all lords. Of course you name him Jesus. Or he's God's savior, and Jesus is God's savior. So of course you would have that name. So there's lots of reasons why he would have that name.
But I have one pushback about the Jesus being a common name. And I think I can't remember who highlighted this last. Maybe it was you saying it, but I thought I heard someone say that, is it not ironic that in the Gospels, Jesus doesn't meet other Jesuses. If it's so common, there's no other Jesuses. So like,
You know what? That's a whole other clip.
I know.
I don't know, but
I'm just making the point.
yeah. I might drop in on that again after this. But so in the mythicist model, you've got like Peter, for example, who gets this revelation, has a dream or whatever that tells him, oh, I'm the archangel of many names, and I have assumed a body and died for you, yada yada. And then so he starts preaching this. The Lord came to me in a dream and said, yada yada. And they would start talking about it as Jesus because that was the name of this angel, right? So that's where the name Jesus would come from. So that's in the mythicist model. This makes sense as to why they'd be talking about this angel as named Jesus. But even if we didn't have that, we have other reasons why they would name this angel Jesus. But those theories are hypothetical. Like there's good reasons, but you don't have it on paper. Whereas this we have on fucking paper, right? Like we have Philo literally just saying it, right? So we have this basis for the name Jesus to be in there. And also it gives them a being to explain why they would think this. So they've already got this being, has all these attributes. They didn't just make this up. So this is another problem. So like, I would think like people like Ehrman and other scholars don't make this mistake. But there are a lot of Christian apologists who do make this mistake, where they say, where they couldn't possibly have made all of this up. Where would they get all these attributes for? Like clearly this is some sort of new, out of nowhere, sudden special thing that they thought there was the image of God. And like, why would they start thinking about all of this stuff? And it's like, well, that's because that being already existed, right? Like there's already a stock member. There's already an action figure, right? Like it's that kind of like established thing. And so you have this being. All you got to do is tell a story about it becoming incarnated and dying, and you've got presto, bingo, you've got Christianity, right? So this is why it plugs into the mythicist model, not because it gives evidence for the mythicist model, but because it takes away arguments against the mythicist model. It shows you the context where it totally makes sense that they would do this. Whereas you might be thinking, well, isn't that a strange thing for them to do? But if you understand this whole context that we were talking about this whole video, you don't think that anymore. So, well, it's not strange anymore. It makes total sense in context, right? Like, so it's easier to grasp what's going on because of this.
And that's a powerful point. I think that's interesting. I mean, you know, I can hear and see in my mind, every example has its counter example of some other explanation. Why did he die on Passover? Well, coincidental. I mean, it just so happened because and I'm kind of like, is it coincidental that have like the atoning death and the blood sacrifice for the sins of all these people and all the other mythic death?
A ritual that's all about rescue from death. Yeah, right. Like it's all
like, so shouldn't we, even if you were a historicist, this is a problem for me. Because I'm like, because one of the biggest things are like, well, Paul says he was crucified. Let's just grant there was a real dude who was crucified.
Yeah.
He never mentions Passover. He never says Jesus died at this time. And so we could still say the Passover death at the Jerusalem Tomb is fiction.
That's right. Yeah, you can say like there's a historical Jesus. He was crucified. But by the time the Gospels start being written, which is a generation later, like really a lifetime later by ancient standards, that it was symbolically useful for them to relocate the time of the crucifixion. We're going to put it at the Passover because that's so like, this is the beautiful, right? You know what I mean? Like, So like that fact does not refute the historicity of Jesus. You can admit that that's all theological math, theological calendaring. That is not history. But no, he was probably, I don't know, crucified days, weeks before or after or whatever. Like he could have been crucified in winter. You don't know. Like it doesn't matter. Like the originally it wouldn't have mattered because they never talk about it in the epistles, right? The authentic epistles. So it clearly didn't matter when the crucifixion occurred calendar wise.
Right.
That was only something that was invented when Mark decided to create a story, right? So, and that's true even if Jesus existed. This is an important point, and that's why I wanted to bring that up. It's like this is not a threat to the historicity model. This is just a way of better explaining the historicity model. Is that you don't have to die on the hill of a massively improbable event where all Jewish and Roman law is against crucifying someone on a holy day. Wouldn't have happened. What they would, and they absolutely would not have crucified when you have all these pilgrims, maximum intensity for rioting. You're not going to do that. What you're going to do is you're going to arrest him and hold him over in jail, and then you're going to kill him on Sunday. Yeah, right? Like that's how reality would have proceeded, right? Like so you can give up the sort of ridiculous story about him being crucified on Passover or right before or whatever, you can give that up and still have Jesus as a historical person.
It's totally theological.
Yeah, right, right.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. And this is the fun part, right? Because you have maximalists who kind of need all of it to have happened, and they wrote
Right,
this.
yeah.
And then you have minimalists.
Like how you say that, yeah, maximalists and the minimalists.
And
yeah,
I feel like I wrestle between minimalist and somewhere like just a little bit above that. And sometimes like I'm like, okay, like I personally see no reason to think that he actually dies on Passover at this time,
right.
this way.
It's honestly it's historically impossible. So it's like really historicists need to give that up, right?
I was saying,
yeah.
But once they give that up,
it hurts.
It's a slippery.
And then they have all their colleagues like, "How dare you say?"
Yes, because think about it too. Like, if I had been taught to think Muhammad got his Muslim, and he was in a cave and Gabriel gave.
That's right, yeah.
And then someone goes, well, listen, there's a lot of legends of prophets in caves with divine messengers, and they've invented that as like etiological divine.
He was in a tea parlor. You don't know.
Yeah. But once you do that, though, you are letting go of something that can be a slippery slope for non-historicity for a lot of things. This is the problem, man. I'll interview Del Allison Jr., right? And I called it myth or memory. I asked him myth or memory because he's into the memory stuff. Like there's something behind it.
Yeah.
He doesn't know what, or it's myth. And I went through Paul. He was kind of confused why I went to Paul, because I'm like, I questioned some of Paul's words and what he's saying. I'm not sure. I
not a reliable narrator.
Yeah. And I also look, I take serious Bob Price's 1 Corinthians 15, at least idea that what if it's not like originally there's 12 and then you got James and then there's another 12 and there's Peter. It's like there might be something there.
Hinky. Yeah, I agree. There's I think something has happened to that passage. Yeah. So but we just don't have the smoking gun to really say.
And I'm just open to it.
Yeah.
And so we went through a little bit of this and he looked at me confused. Then we got to Mark. And man, it was fun. It was like a bingo game. Like ding, ding, ding. He'd be like, I think that there's no memory behind it. I think that's complete myth.
Yeah.
Oh no, I think there might be a memory. And hearing him do this game, it was so subjective from one guy. And I could do that game with every academic in the book. And I guarantee you, we could come out and do a collage and show, all right, here's like a scale. We could have a chart and show almost our own Jesus seminar.
Yeah, there's a famous quote, and I can't remember, unfortunately, right off the top of my head. I can't remember if it was Crossan or Ludeman or who said this, but and I'm paraphrasing, not quoting, but the idea was like, and this was a criticism of the method of criteria, which we have another video on. But anyway, so this idea is what they were saying. They're criticizing contemporary, and what you were just saying. They're saying like everybody's got their own Jesus. And it's like, well, that means our methods are broken, right? Like if we're not all converging on the same Jesus, we're all coming up with our own Jesus, our methods don't work, right? And the thing they said is it really seems to be that, and I think they say like everybody looks down a well and sees themselves reflected back, right? So it's whatever they need Jesus to be, suddenly magically that's what their criteria point to them to find is that's Jesus. I need Jesus to be a cynic philosopher. Bingo, surpriso, he's a cynic philosopher, and things like that. I think I see this going on with like Dennis MacDonald and others. Like they need Jesus to be a certain thing, and so they're looking down the well and they're just seeing their own ideas reflected back at them, and they're seeing that as like, oh look, I see who Jesus really is, but it's really a circular argument. And I think that's a lot of this where you're talking about Allison. Like Allison has his own picture of Jesus. It's at the bottom of the well, but it's really just his own ideas and beliefs and expectations being reflected back at him. And there's been a series of books by James Crossley. He does books like Jesus in the Age of Terror, and so on. You can look at the series of books which covers this whole point. Every book is about how Jesus keeps changing based on the politics of the time, the politics and the scholars who are writing and stuff, so that it's this same well reflection idea that and in fact he might even have a quote he might have the original quote in one of these books, but he goes through the idea that like people keep chasing Jesus, but what they keep coming up with is what they want to find, right? And that's why we have like 10 different versions of Jesus, because we have 10 different people who want 10 different things. They want to find thing. And so like, anyway, so Crossley has this extensive series of books that talks about how the ideas about Jesus change based on the zeitgeist, the sort of political expectations of everybody involved. And that's an example of scholars looking at this and thinking like, yeah, I don't know that we're doing this right.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think we're like over relying on gut feelings and intuition, which is so prone to just finding what you want to find, right?
It's kind of funny that you mentioned him, because I got his book, The Quest, the latest one. And I've only read the chapter from Robin Walsh so far. I mean, only because I got it in advance to be able to read.
Oh, you're talking about the anthology. Yeah, right.
And in her chapter, fascinating chapter going into like miracle stories and how the gospels operate this way. And she uses like king and country. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, she has one sentence like she actually attributes, and I talked to her about this on the phone. And at the end of the day, she pretty much is like, so really addressing the topic of the book about whether there's a historical Jesus or not, I think that what we're reading is the ideas of the author.
Yeah, right.
Like, so like she literally doesn't,
Yeah,
she's just pointing out like, it's a hopeless endeavor, and I'm not even trying to attempt to figure out the guy.
That's right.
You know,
and that's actually a common position. In fact, that anthology was compiled because everybody contributing agrees with that sentiment, that they've kind of given up. It's like the new quest for Jesus is about, we're giving up reconstructing Jesus. We don't think it can be done.
Yeah.
What we're going to do is we're going to reconstruct the environment and context in which Jesus would have lived,
or even the literary work of
exactly, or the context of the how this literature got generated. So they're doing all the ancillary stuff and avoiding the question of historicity.
And that's cool.
Yeah, it's cool, except it's a little like annoying when you're not willing to just admit what you're doing, really. Right?
I see what you said there. Yeah, like just say it's hopeless.
Yeah. Because that's an example of the new quest, whatever, of the historical Jesus. In that book, they never mention doubting historicity. They never, and even Justin Meggitt, who has one chapter in there, he has like one sentence or two that's a bit snarky about doubting historicity, and he cites his own paper, but he doesn't cite me or Lataster. Like his paper cites me and Lataster, but you would have to follow the breadcrumb to even find out that doubt about the historicity of Jesus is an actual serious, scholarly proposition.
Why not have someone like you in the anthology?
Yeah, I know.
From a different.
No one likes me, so I'm too scandalous. I can't. It's third rail. I'm the third rail guy. It's like, no, you can't go there. Come on, man. Don't say it out loud.
You said in this video that you're a historicist. I'm not listening.
No, you changed. You hit the button.
Oh, hold on. It's too late. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being a patron, and thank you so much for your time, Dr.
Yeah, it's been fun.